The place cards were handwritten. That was my mother's touch. She always believed handwritten things made people behave better. They were folded pieces of cream paper arranged around the Thanksgiving table, each one carefully placed beside a wine glass. My brothers read S. Daniel. My mother's read Fes Mom. My father's simply said Da Fes. Mine said Res, the others. I noticed it before anyone sat down. I stood there for a second, looking at it the way you look at a typo on a sign, wondering if maybe you're misunderstanding what you're seeing. Across the table, Daniel was already pouring himself a drink. "Did you see yours?" he said casually. He didn't look up when he said it. That answered the question. I picked up the card, turned it once in my fingers, and placed it back down exactly where it had been. My mother was carrying the turkey in from the kitchen and didn't notice anything unusual. By the time everyone sat, the moment had already dissolved into the usual Thanksgiving rhythm: plates moving, chairs scraping, the quiet logistics of passing bowls. Nobody mentioned the card, but nobody changed it either. My father liked speeches, not formal ones, casual speeches. The kind people pretend are spontaneous even though you can tell they've been rehearsed in the car ride over. The toast came halfway through dinner, once the second bottle of wine was open. He stood up slightly from his chair, glass raised. "I've been thinking lately," he began, "about how early you can tell who's really going somewhere." My mother gave a polite smile. Daniel leaned back like someone who already knew the ending. My father gestured toward him. "Some kids just peak early," he said with a laugh. "You see the momentum, the discipline, the clarity." Daniel shrugged modestly, the way people do when they're enjoying praise but pretending not to. My father reached under the table and pulled out a small green box. Even before it opened, everyone knew what it was. Rolex box has a certain gravity to it. Daniel's eyebrows lifted when he opened it. "Dad," he said, laughing. "You didn't have to do that." But his wrist was already halfway out of his sleeve. Applause moved around the table, the way it does when something expensive appears. Then my father reached for another package. This one was thinner, rectangular, wrapped in bookstore paper. He slid it across the table to me. "For you," he said. I unwrapped it slowly. The cover showed a man standing on a mountain looking determined about something. The title was "Find Your Direction Before It's Too Late, DOS." "Thought it might help," my father said lightly. "Everyone moves at their own pace." There was a small pause. Not awkward exactly. Asked quiet. I smiled. "Thanks," I said, and I meant it politely enough that the conversation moved on. Moments like that don't explode. They settle. You carry them around afterward like a small object in your pocket, noticing it from time to time. I'd spent most of my life being the quieter variable in our family equation. Daniel was visible success, promotion announcements, new cars, celebratory dinners. My father understood those metrics. They were the same ones he had grown up measuring himself by. My life looked different from the outside. I didn't talk much about work. Partly because I was busy. Partly because the few times I had tried explaining what I was building, the conversation had drifted toward Daniel's latest milestone before I finished the sentence. So eventually I stopped volunteering details. It kept dinner conversations simpler. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I was in the conference room reviewing hiring reports. The company had been growing quickly. Growth brings paperwork, resumes, screening notes, interview schedules. Our recruitment dashboard listed every candidate in a long scrolling column. One name caught my eye. My father. For a moment I assumed it was coincidence. It wasn't a rare last name. Then I opened the application. The work history matched perfectly. His consulting firm had been shrinking for a while. I knew that much from the occasional comment he'd made about market shifts and temporary slow quarters. Apparently those quarters had finally run out. I leaned back in the chair and looked through the glass wall of the conference room. People moved through the office the way they always did, fast, focused, comfortable. Someone waved at me from the hallway. They all knew me as the founder. None of them knew the man whose resume sat open on my laptop. HR required transparency with family connections. I emailed them the situation. Policy was simple: the interview could proceed, but 2 additional executives had to be present to avoid conflicts of interest. Everything stayed formal. My father received the same automated scheduling email every other candidate got. The morning of the interview, the receptionist called upstairs. "Your 10 o'clock is here." I walked down to the lobby. My father was standing near the glass entrance, adjusting his jacket the way he used to before client meetings when I was younger. For a moment he didn't see me. Then he did. Recognition crossed his face slowly, not surprise at seeing me, but surprise at where he was seeing me. "You work here?" he asked. I nodded once. "I started the company." The sentence landed quietly between us. He looked around the lobby again, this time differently. The reception desk, the employee badges, the framed company timeline on the wall. "Oh," he said. The interview itself stayed structured, 3 chairs on one side of the table. My father on the other. We asked about leadership during industry downturns, about adapting business models, about managing younger teams in changing markets. He answered well, confidently, thoughtfully. Halfway through, our operations director asked a question about the company's expansion strategy. Then she glanced toward me. "Since Alex built the original model," she said, "might want to add context." My father turned slightly in his chair. That was the moment something shifted. Not dramatically, just unmistakably. The hiring committee met the next day. My father's experience was solid, but the role he'd applied for required a different technical background. We debated it longer than most candidates. Eventually we agreed on an alternative. A consulting position. Less authority, flexible hours, a chance to contribute without reshaping the entire structure. I called him personally. "Would like to offer you a consulting role," I said. "If you're interested." There was a small pause on the line. "That sounds reasonable," he replied. No disappointment in his voice. Just adjustment. A few weeks later, I saw him walking through the lobby again. This time he had a visitor badge and a folder under his arm. He nodded when he passed my office door. Not formally. Just differently. The self-help book still sits on a shelf in my apartment. I never read it, but I kept it. Not as a reminder of the insult. Just as proof that sometimes the quietest role in a family story turns out not to be the smallest one.